everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Okay, this is a breaking story, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be one of the most impactful breaking stories really going on in the industry right now. The ending-ish and much of the content of The Last of Us 2 has leaked. This is not a spoiler video. I will share some reactions later on, but don't worry, if you do not want spoilers, you absolutely will not get them in this video. This is a safe video for you to watch. But I mean, just in terms of business analysis, why this has happened, this story is absolutely massive, and I've got to wonder if there are some risks after this story that some companies won't actually be willing to take. Of course, this is a breaking story though, so things will be developing fast. This is our initial report on it. So with that said, let's just dive into it. First though, there's two bits of context we've got to have, right? So number one, The Last of Us 2 was delayed because of, everything that was going on in the world. And the reasoning there was that physical distribution would be a lot harder. And of course, physical distribution, especially in the USA, is still a decently important part of how people get games. From what I understand, it's a lot less important than, say, it is in the UK, where generally internet access is a little bit better. So we had that going on. And then of course we had, and this will become extremely important to this video, this from Jason Schreier, one of his last Kotaku articles actually. That was going into the culture of crunch at Naughty Dog. And in this article, we learned some very important things that absolutely do tie into the rumored reason behind this leak. Now, as an example, one gameplay department had 70% of their headcount from Uncharted 4 actually depart the company. And in this article, Jason also went into how this is so bad, right? They basically ran out of video game animators. They had such a high level of employee turnover in some of their animation departments that they had to rely on getting VFX, like film animators, in to do the job because they burnt through games animators, and they had such a bad reputation that, yeah, games animators were no longer okay with working for there, which really is quite insane. And if you really want to look into crunch, the VFX world is insane for crunch. Those staff get treated so horribly. So you've got all this stuff going on. Games delayed, and, there had been a little bit of controversy. Some people were worried. There was I believe on 4chan, a leak that came out purporting to give us what the broad story was, that people basically deemed, sort of a lot of them just thought, this is so bad, there's no way it could be true. Well, so you had all that going on, and then you fast forward to today, and we have this leak happen. Now, this leak is something that is being DMCA takedown. It is being just absolutely snuffed out wherever it is. Right now, via Streamable, there are many ways to actually see the leak. I won't be showing you those. I won't be discussing any story details or anything like that, but suffice to say, to go over things, a broad picture version of the game's narrative did actually leak. And key moments that are supposed to be very impactful to the player in the form of cinematics, they have also been leaked. Now, this is the sort of thing where those cinematics, they're not something that can be faked, right? Not at the level of quality that they actually are. So this does very much appear to be the real deal. Now, as for why, well, it's very heavily rumored that this is a disgruntled employee and it's resulted from a pay dispute, and that's why this has been leaked. That right now is unverified, though certainly if you have a think about Jason Schreier's article that I just showed you and the almost legendary, even within the games industry, levels of crunch that Naughty Dog actually do, I mean, come on, a disgruntled employee, that seems very much like it could be a thing that would happen, and being real as well, with people working from home, I've got to imagine that there are data security lapses and things like that that would make a leak like this quite a bit more possible. So yeah, there you go, it leaked. Now, just to give you some context, I'm going to talk about things that Neil Druckmann, the director of the game, also the director of The Last of Us Part 1 and Uncharted 4, a game that itself had its own drama, some things that he has said. And these are things that sometimes have been a little bit controversial. So we've got this where, we don't use the word fun. That's a quote from Neil. And it really is just him talking about how, they're trying to be super, super serious, right? This is games as art, no room for fun. That kind of thing, right? So he's talking about that, and then if you actually go to his character, or not his character bio, his Twitter bio, I zoom in here, abuser of characters, that is also there. And then if I also hop over here, The Last of Us Part 2 will be a game about hate. That is something that he also said. Now, thematically, the point there is that The Last of Us 1 was a game that was more about loss and love, whereas this is a game that's more about hate and revenge. And they have said many times that the sort of cycle of revenge and cycle of violence is a core theme that they wish to explore with the narrative of this game. Now, to a lot of people, that sounded like, yeah, this is some very, pretty hardcore, pretty raw adult entertainment that we're going to get. It's not going to pull any punches. This will be a serious story that we can really get behind. So a lot of people were excited about that, but a lot of people were also just thinking, oh, are you just going to go for shock value? Is this going to feel like those empty shocks that Game of Thrones tried to pull when it was really trying to appeal to literally NFL players and soccer mums? And that's not me being derogatory to people in the NFL or mothers. That is actually what the sort of showrunners of Game of Thrones said. And that was really them sort of, explaining their some of the ways they took that show. So there was a lot of skepticism, a lot of worry, and then certainly some of the trailers that were shown for this game, they were brutal as hell, right? They were really brutal, some very uncomfortable stuff, and that again had people a little bit worried, right? That they go too, just too gratuitous, and maybe they were trying to push all of these boundaries, right? And maybe a way that's self-gratifying for them, but perhaps isn't really going to resonate with the audience or meet their expectations, which I guess is just a long-running theme in media, I think, in these modern days. So, without telling you what the leak is, let's just say it's some pretty hard stuff, okay? And it is stuff that a lot of people are not very happy about. Indeed, if you just go through, r/games, now that is a subreddit that generally is going to be pretty pro the types of stories, being told in a game, maybe not Last of Us 2, but like Last of Us 1, right? They'll be very much on board with that. Really would be Naughty Dog's sort of native audience, I would say. And that thread is full of people who are basically just saying, well, save me $60, I guess. Which is quite something to see. And really, I bring this up because it highlights something very, very key here. This leak was done to maximize damage to Naughty Dog and to Sony. That much is absolutely clear. Because the thing is, while they do make, I'd say, narratively risky decisions, and they do take things in a big direction, those are things that maybe could work in execution when you actually see all those characters and see their stories play out for hours and hours and hours on end. It's the type of thing where, there are some things, right? You read a plot summary for a movie and it doesn't really seem that cool. But then you watch the movie and it's an entirely different experience that's not really summarized by a simple summary, right? So it is entirely possible that this stuff will play out a lot better than people actually think it does, but right now that's not really the point. The point is that there are a whole bunch of memeable factoids, and when I say meme there, I don't mean meme as in haha funny, I mean meme as in the actual sort of definition of the word meme as derived from gene, which was, I believe, coined by Richard Dawkins quite a while ago. A lot of people actually don't know that's where the word meme comes from. It comes from him. Very interesting little side story, but there's a lot of memeable elements in the leaks that are going to spread far and wide. And those are going to be the most controversial aspects of this game. And that means that people will be seeing them without the full surrounding context, really, that the storytellers would have intended. So, yes, this is crafted for damage, and my God, has it caused damage. This absolutely will cost them sales. I certainly know that after seeing the leaks, I feel less enthusiastic about this game, and speaking anecdotally to the people that I know who have seen the leaks, they do feel less enthusiastic about this game. There's a lot of people, even just in my own friend circles, messaging each other, not really out of outrage, but just out of disappointment, or that, this is the direction that the story is going in. This will cause a lot of damage to Sony, a lot of damage to Naughty Dog, and Naughty Dog is a company that I don't really think it can afford to take that much more damage. So Last of Us 1, it's not the most complex game, right? It's a pretty simple boilerplate narrative, but what mattered was they executed it very, very, very well. But then you move into Uncharted 4, right? Amy Hennig, who was really leading Uncharted, and she goes way back to the Legacy of Kain days, she leaves the company, and you sort of have a massive tone shift into the dark with Uncharted 4. And then you also have a massive increase in the runtime of the cinematics, because it really does seem like Neil Druckmann actually wants to be working in film, not games sometimes. I mean, I did actually enjoy Uncharted 4, but even for me, as somebody who's got a higher tolerance for long cinematics in games, especially if they're well animated and well acted, as Naughty Dogs generally are, it still felt like a bit much for me, right? So Uncharted 4 did lose them a portion of their audience, I would say, as much as it did do well. I think the original people who like Jack, they're long gone. But if this game is really struggling, right, if it just misses its audience emotionally in the way that, say, Game of Thrones Season 8 missed much of its audience on an emotional level, then that could spell a little bit of doom for Naughty Dog. I'm not saying that they would collapse or anything, but that game not doing well would certainly suck for them, right? They're a very expensive company to run based on their location and based on the amount of crunch, just the sheer hours they actually get from their employees. But also, it's a company that's got a bad rap in the games industry. What games animator is going to want to join Naughty Dog with all the stories that are going on about them? I mean, CD Projekt Red, they've got a bad rap sometimes. Rockstar have got a real bad rap sometimes, but those are both companies that seem to have made public commitments to get better, and as one of Kotaku's articles actually showed, yeah, insiders at Rockstar actually do think they're moving in a better direction. But we're not seeing any of that with Naughty Dog. And indeed, after that Naughty Dog story broke, you had Neil Druckmann doing all these weird subtweets that were sort of going around the topic on his Twitter that really rubbed people the wrong way as well. So I don't think they're hot stuff. I don't think that young storytellers in the games industry will want to go to Naughty Dog just based off how they seem to treat their staff and what's going on there. So overall, this is terrible for Sony. They're going to lose a lot of money. I think a lot of people with maybe, if they had pre-orders for this game, I think they're going to cancel them. I think a lot less people are going to buy this game blind on launch day. That's going to be highly controversial, and that will really hurt their bottom line. Whoever this leaker was, they're going to be legally nuked into oblivion. But if their goal was to get some payback over some sort of perceived slight against them by the company, they sure have achieved that. I mean, they really have. So, with that said, yeah, I actually just want to share with you my reactions to this leak. Now, I'm not going to show you any images or anything like that, but I will say if you've got the highest level of spoiler sensitivity and you don't want to hear my reactions, now would be the time to tune out of this video, to close it. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear what you think about just this leak and the business side of it, which I think is really important. So yeah, with that, I just want to talk about my reactions to the leak. And I would say that to me, it reeks of a few different things. I don't think there's actually that much wrong with the story they want to tell in principle if it was its own thing, but I do think that as a sequel, it heavily suffers. This is a story that is doing things that will feel very, they'll feel, I think, to some people a bit disrespectful of the emotional attachment that they had to that cast of characters from the first game. Feels like there's a little bit of the subversion of expectations. I mean, certainly, like, I've watched some of the cinematics. I've got to say, Neil Druckmann, maybe he doesn't even want to go into films. Maybe he wants to go into snuff films. There's some real stuff going on there that is not pleasant to watch. Now, that is an artistically relevant thing to do, absolutely, but you do have to keep your audience in mind. And, I think, right, whenever you're making a new thing, there's got to be a lot of you in that, or a lot of your team in that, right? A lot of that just raw essence to make something that people haven't really seen before. But then, once people actually get engaged with the thing that you've made, I think a writer has got to then respect that fact, right? They've got to respect the fact that they've made this thing and audience has loved it. That audience is now invested. And I think that writers should really try to take that audience into account. Now, I don't mean pander to them, because I think that can be just the death of creativity as well. But certainly, if you are writing purely for a bit of self-gratification and only for your own storytelling, and you're doing that in the context of a sequel, I mean, you're obviously going to run into problems. So what I'd say there is, yeah, you can't cry if you piss some people off by doing that. Now, I'm in a situation, right, where, our first game, And you'll learn a lot more about it over time. But there's a scene for us. It's been written for a long time, right? We've got 150,000 words done. But this is a game about Antarctic sort of exploration, right? Not literally, but essentially, right? The heroic age of that. And there are some real nasty things that happen, that suck, that don't feel good, especially when our sound designer, who's really good, makes a sound effect for it that just hits you, and you do feel a bit terrible. But for us, that was like an important part of, what that stuff actually was. And we sort of did it to serve the story, not to really just purely to shock players. But the thing is, that made sense for the story we were trying to tell there, and especially in the context of it being a fresh IP, a new game, right? Where people hadn't had that like existing attachment to it. But if we were to make that same creative decision that we make in that particular pivotal moment in the first third of the game, if we were to make that decision in the sequel of that game, I don't think it would go down that well, right? So there's a lot of just thinking about your audience and thinking about how to craft a tale that's really going to work for them, that's going to, give them some of what they want, some things that they didn't know they want, and also be creatively satisfying for you. So there's this really fine line when it comes to creativity. And for me, really, there's this nasty, cruel, nihilistic, and depressing thing that I've really seen slip into American writing. Now, I don't know if this is purely an American thing. I think it just so happens that so much of our culture, our media, does come from the USA. But just in the last few years, it's like stuff has just been needlessly dark, needlessly nihilistic and horrible. Even How to Train Your Dragon 3, right? That had this really a wild self-hatred ending about how, we're just not worthy of them. The dragons have got to go away. And I think that's something where I don't know if it's maybe outside of the US people didn't like it as much because there seems to be different reactions to things in different regions, but there's just this nihilistic, nasty sort of element that I see seeping in. And I think a lot of creatives behind that stuff, I think they think it's smarter than it is. And actually, some of this reminds me of Ari Aster's work. He did Hereditary and Midsummer, both I think incredibly overrated, incredibly stupid movies that think they're very smart, that a lot of people like to jerk off over because they seem artistic. I mean, certainly gorgeous production design, gorgeous camera work, so much to love there, but just at the core narrative and on a thematic level, I think very simple, very overrated. I just see a lot of that similar stuff going on, right? That just nihilistic element. Certainly, right, I'll say this, I'm glad the game was delayed, because if people... there's a lot of people for whom media is, it's escapism, right? It's a place they sort of go when they're want to break. And especially in the quarantine situation, right? That will be really a core thing for people. I'm glad that people who wanted to go to this game for, a real hard, brutal adult tale that sort of still ends up being about love, like, what The Last of Us originally was, even though it did have, I think, a really beautiful, morally ambiguous ending. But, people want that. I mean, man, if they were feeling down and they played this, oh dear, their friends and family should watch out for them, because this is, TLDR, if you care about those characters, might want to just prepare yourself a little bit before you hop into this one. And I think it's not just only what happens to the characters on paper. I think it's just some of the methods in which Naughty Dog chose to show those things, to do those things. I think that's also going to have people just a little bit rubbed the wrong way. I think certainly an interesting case in audience expectations, and really this dance, and I think there's a lot of authorial ownership here, right? Like, when an author creates a piece of work and it goes out there, this is such a long-standing topic of discussion, just within, I guess, creativity. You're an author, you put your work out into the world, and then people kind of take that, and it is what it is to them as well. So, like, does a bit of that authorial ownership sort of die once it actually gets out into the world? And then if that does happen, how does the author actually take that into account when they're making future stories, future content set within that universe, that IP, that franchise? It's an interesting discussion. It is one that has been happening for, probably hundreds of years. I think it'll continue to happen. I think the only difference now is that social media and just media in general means that these things, these ideas, they can spread fast. The outrage can spread fast. And I think it does mean that any blunders in that area will bite back a lot harder. And I think that is something that just a few corporations have seen happen in the last while. So there you go. Certainly I'll say, in terms of my personal opinion, I don't really like where they seem to have went with this one. I am open to my mind being changed by it having a really strong execution in game, but certainly I don't think this is as smart as they think it is. I don't think it's an interesting subversion of expectations whatsoever. And I mean, thematically, it seems pretty simple, right? Like Neil Druckmann has said that cycles of revenge and cycles of violence are a core part of this game. And you know what? I'm going to be real with you here. He says that, and I think most of us, when we saw that interview, could pretty much extrapolate what the story of this game would be, and what the ending would be, and what the ending message would be. So I don't think he's being as smart as he is with the story that he's went with. I think it's probably just dull and nasty, and overall will leave people feeling empty and hollow. And maybe we'll put a bullet into that franchise, which certainly will not make HBO happy. Got to imagine HBO are not happy whatsoever at this reaction. There you go. That's my thoughts. I mean, an interesting one, right? We do get to talk about some more sort of, I don't know, sort of big brainy abstract topics about ethereal ownership and all of that. So I'd love to know, what do you think there, right? Like, what do you think a creator's sort of, responsibility to their audience is? Is it just to serve that audience? Is that then pandering? And is that fundamentally uncreative and boring? I mean, certainly I do see a lot of media where that happens, and I think it's really boring and I tune out. So yeah, I'd love to know what you think about all that. And also, of course, Last of Us Part 2. So let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video. And of course, I'll see you tomorrow.